fortunately for me, I have a very big fan who is my wife, right? And, from the very beginning, when I had nothing, Emmanuel, and I was in fact in debt when I met my wife at 21 years of age, student debt and various things. She said this one thing to me, which I'll never forget, right? She said, you know what? I see something in you that you don't see in yourself. Right?
Wow.
I'll never forget
That's
it.
profound. That's very profound.
So I needed to hear it, right? And it reminded me that even in the time when I, as a human who is fallible, just because I'm a psychologist doesn't mean I'm in control of my mind at all times, right? At that time, I needed to hear something that would trigger a series of reactions within me, right? To give me some confidence to trust in myself, right? That I was more than just a shell of a person, right? There was a vision or a mission or something that I could tie myself to that was going to be bigger than me, that I could be a part of. And I think, my wife played an instrumental role in 2012, just before we started the business, to tell me, you really need to do this. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay, right? It'll work out, right? And you got to trust yourself. And I think that had a massive impact on me. Also having these founders, right, around me. So I started to realize that one of the reasons that I hadn't set up this business yet, because I thought I had to do it by myself, right? I didn't realize that I was part of a community. There were people around me that you can lean on, right? And so all of a sudden I went from being this inward decision-making person to looking outside myself, right? Being objective about myself. Now, as individuals, we are all terrible at being objective about ourselves. That is the human condition, right? And so we need this group of people around us to help us to do that. I have a coach, I have a mentor, and I have a therapist. I have multiple mentors, but I have a therapist, I have a coach. It's part of the process of being a psychologist, but I think I also need good people around me, right, to constantly interact with and challenge me. And I think, I have to put my money where my mouth is, right? If I'm suggesting to people that we should do this, then I should do it myself. And it has been profoundly valuable to me to hear and be challenged by people who I respect, who are, and it was a bit of feedback that I remember hearing from an old boss of mine, which was, take feedback from people who are fighting in the arena. And what it meant for me is, if you're just getting random voices coming from people who have never set up their own business, right, who've never set up an infectious diseases department before, who are just commenting, right, on the side, that noise that we hear sometimes, it's just that noise. Don't listen to that. It's noise, right? What you want to do is to find people who are in the arena fighting with you, fighting for you, who have had the fight, right? Those voices are really important to hear. And so if you surround yourself with these people, magic starts to happen. And I think it's quite an interesting thing, sort of way of trying to reduce this sort of distraction, right, that we have in our lives. I don't know if that resonates at all.
It does. Light bulb resonates completely. And I was reflecting, and there's so much commonality. And I think we should take the opportunity to celebrate our wives. And because what your wife did for you there, and did, I think she was like a coach.
Yeah.
She asked you a question or made a statement which got you into action. And we need to celebrate our wives for what they do. And I have a similar experience also with my wife, since from Cameroon, who believed in me since medical school, and has always been by my side, and never doubted anything that I'm able to do. So very similar. And I think as the listeners, podcast listeners, will identify completely with that. Our partners, wives or husbands, we tend to have relationships with our wives, which are personal relationships, intimate relationships, but they are also coaches and help each other in different ways. So really identify with that. I also identified with having people around you who are mentors and coaches. And I think we've swiftly or smoothly moved into improving performance and high performance, which was the topic of today by what you've just said. Because my understanding is that people who perform well don't do so that by chance. They have mentors, they have coaches, and they don't do it on their own. And some people do it unconsciously and naturally with people around them, like, for example, your wife and my wife and other family members, maybe parents, maybe siblings, or even children that may sometimes ask you questions that get you into action. And the
Yeah.
people at work, and certainly in my book, From Struggle to Success, I also mentioned that it's important to speak to people who have done it. It's like people who had the scars from that fight. Speak to them because they know what the things you should avoid, and that's also the reason for this podcast, which is learning from other people who have learned the skill of turning struggles into success, because they have the scars they've learned, and you don't want to make the same mistakes that they've made. You actually want to use their lessons to become even better and more successful. So completely identify with that.
Yeah.
With this podcast, everybody gets something different. And I'm sure other people listening will be taking something completely different from the things I've just said, and fascinating. As I said, we've moved very smoothly and effortlessly into high performance, and that is that is what you do. And I read your bio, also listened to some podcasts that you've been involved in before, and that is the expertise you have and the skill that you have in being able to take people, organizations, individuals, teams from A to B, and take them up a hill, up to the top of the hill when they're better, stronger, and more successful or excellent. So I wondered whether they were what in your term, what is improving performance? What is high performance?
For me, high performance is sometimes it's a very objective, thing. You've got a certain goal that you want to achieve, right? And that can be, quite tangible. You can say, we want to get to this point by this time frame, and so forth. In most cases, it's really about improvement and growth, right? And I think for me, there are a lot of factors that contribute to that. We specialize in a certain number of them, which I think are super important. And even just the idea of having the right people around you, and we talked about performance, right? I mean, I got a friend of mine who used to play professional football, Alan Nielsen. He's a Danish football player, used to play for Tottenham and Bayern Munich. He used to have this rule around high performance, which I thought was really interesting. And it was called the 1/3 rule, which basically said your time should be distributed 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 between these three groups of people. 1/3 of your time should be spent with people who are a lower performance than you, right? So it means that you are teaching them. You are reinforcing the lessons that you have learned. So it's a bit like when you're learning the times tables, right? Initially, it's not very great, but over time, as you reinforce, I know that 8 times 5 equals 40. You can ask me anything on the times tables. I'm going to tell you, Emmanuel, right, what those things are, because of the effort that I've put into it by teaching myself, but also teaching my children, teaching other people. 1/3 of your time should be spent with your peers, the people who are similar to you, right? Maybe there are other specialists for yourself who have built other departments, right? Or working in infectious diseases or in, other faculty, right? But 1/3 of your time, and this is the hardest part, it should be spent with people better than you, right? Now, that is the one that is the most challenging for people when I speak to them. And I ask them, tell me about the 1/3, what's happening? And they say, I barely speak to people who are better than me, right? And so therefore, as a result of that, how are you going to visualize or get to that point, right, where you're going to be operating at a higher level? So spending time learning, absorbing, whatever it might be from those individuals, I think is really important from that. I think the other thing is also, you've got to have a vision or a purpose as to why you want to improve in anything. If you think about an entrepreneur, for example, an entrepreneur goes and becomes a high performer. They flog themselves to be the best they can be because they have something that they're striving for that is better than them, that is bigger than them, right? It has to have a bigger impact. And so, it's funny. I was talking to an organization, a multinational here, about work-life balance. And I said, "Oh, so I guess you're not enjoying your work then?" They said, "No, we are." I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Why would you be talking about work-life balance then?" And because it never comes up when I talk to an entrepreneur, right? No entrepreneur who's passionate about what they do ever talks about work-life balance. Now, that is not to say that we shouldn't be managing our energy and we shouldn't be looking after ourselves. That self-care is absolutely critical, right? But most of the time when we talk about work-life balance, we are generally perhaps feeling like work is eroding who we are, our identity, right? It's taking us away from doing things that we could be doing that are more enjoyable. Now, the question to me for most people is, how are you going to be a high performer if you're worried about work-life balance? I'm yet to meet, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Emmanuel, if you've ever met anybody like this. Have you met anybody who is the top of their field who has worried about work-life balance?
No.
No, it's just not possible,
No.
right? And the reason is the vision or the mission consumes you, right? It becomes a part of your identity and who you are. You actually get energy from that mission, right? Yes, you have to give energy, but you also receive energy from that mission. So high performance, to sustain high performance, you need to be able to also have that energy. I call that the energy ATM, right? That, during the course of the day, if you just keep going to this ATM and withdrawing energy all the time, right? What happens at the end of the day? You're bankrupt.
Runs out.
Right? You're out, right? So during the day, you need to be depositing into that ATM, right? That needs to happen. And so I think a lot of us sometimes forget that what we do during the day, whether we are at home with the family, whether we are at a workplace, whether we are doing charity work, right, needs to not only be energy consuming, but also energy originating as well.
Wow, that's just also fascinating.